Good morning, everyone. My name is Ian Morrison. I'm the Electoral Area Director for Cowichan Lake South Scots Falls, and I will be chairing the Special Electoral Area Services Committee meeting for Wednesday, October 2nd. I'd like to begin by recognizing that the CVRD is on the unceded territories of the Cowichan, Malahat, Subasit, Halalt, Penelakut, Staminas, Liaxin, Paquichan, DT Dot, and Pachi Dot nations, whose people have walked gently here for thousands of years. I would like to turn to Ms. Ferguson. What have you got for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have the approval of the agenda. The motion is that the agenda be amended with the addition of a revised CVRD alternate futures report, attachment A. Attached to the item R2 report from the Strategic Services Division Complete Communities Grant 1 final report, and that the agenda be approved as amended.
Moved. Do we have a seconder? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Ms. Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next is a public input period. The public input period is to offer the public an opportunity to comment on an agenda item before the committee considers the item. The public input period procedure policy allows for an allotment of 15 minutes where the speaker is welcome to comment on any item or items on the agenda up to a maximum of 3 minutes. This excludes items that are or have been subject to a public hearing. Input from the community is valued and appreciated. We request that input is presented in a friendly and respectful manner. Your cooperation in maintaining a safe, respectful, and orderly environment is greatly appreciated.
Like to welcome anyone who would like to provide input on the agenda today. I see a couple of nodding no's, so with that, Ms. Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next on the agenda is reports. R1 is a report from the Strategic Initiatives Division, Electoral Area Housing Needs Report 2024 presentation from Renee Prolu and Patrick Ostrick of Liquor, Geospatial, and Modus, Electoral Area Housing Needs Assessment.
I think we're having Ms. No? Okay. Who's starting us off? Patrick or Renee?
We have a joint presentation, but so we will be both starting off.
Okay. Presentation coming up?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, I'm just going to turn the floor over to you.
Great. I will start sharing my screen. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Patrick and I are here today to present on the completed housing needs assessment report. Introductions. My name is Renee. I am a GIS analyst and a housing analyst at Liquor Geospatial, and I am here with my colleague Patrick from Modus. I will let Patrick introduce himself later in the presentation, but that is the team that that I have to present to you today on the results of the housing needs assessment report. So today we're going to be first talking about an overview of, if you were at the last meeting, we did a little bit more of a deep dive into how housing need was calculated according to the provincial regulations. So we're just going to do a quick overview of that today, and then talk about the results and the next step for targets. And then Patrick will be talking about community engagement results. And then we will be talking about OCP objectives and how that relates to the work that has been completed. And then we will be talking about next steps. So the provincial housing needs assessment is basically some legislation that that the province has published, where every community needs to complete a housing needs report. And there are kind of quite strict mathematical guidelines on how to calculate this and which data sources to use. Broadly, it looks at extreme core housing need, which is someone who is spending 50% or more of their income on housing, or it is otherwise inadequate. Homelessness, suppressed household formation, so households that would have been formed under previous economic conditions but have been suppressed and could not form in the current constrained housing market. It also looks at growth. So what is the historic growth in a community, and vacancy rate. So what is the rental vacancy rate in a community? Essentially, all of these components are summed. There is also a local demand multiplier, but this only applies to municipalities and therefore does not apply for the electoral areas of the Cowichan Valley. So essentially what we have is we have calculated all of these components: the extreme core housing need, homelessness, suppressed household formation, growth, and vacancy rate, and summed it together, which has resulted in these targets for the next 5 years and the next 20 years. So I'll note that the numbers at the top, the bolded Cowichan Valley, that is for the entirety of the CVRD, and that is taking those steps one by one and applying them to the entire region. Because of the methodology not being a complete disaggregation, if you sum up each of the individual areas plus the municipalities, it won't perfectly match up with the Cowichan Valley as a whole. So these are kind of numbers to take as they are presented. They shouldn't be necessarily summed up from their subcomponents, but this is discussed further in the report itself. But we see that the Cowichan Valley, according to the provincial calculations, requires about 5,000 new units over the next 5 years and about 15,000 over the next 20. So the next steps, the provincial legislation kind of stops there in terms of the calculation of housing need from a units numbers, like numerical perspective. But we can do a lot more with this information. We can look at affordability, unit mixes, and then testing where this growth is actually possible. So we know that affordability and built forms are incredibly important context to a unit target. It implies that is how we decide what should be zoned to actually best fit need. So using headship data, we did calculate unit targets and understanding whether those should be attached or detached, how big they should be, i.e. how many bedrooms should they have. And we can understand broadly cost targets for different households. So, approximately how much should these units cost so that they are affordable to people who are living in the area and would like to move to the area. So in order to align these targets with complete communities work, which will be presented on later today, is we had to upgrade them from 20-year projections to 25-year projections. So that's still using the same formula, the same methodology, just adding another 5 years of need. And then we scaled those to the LAPs. So if the complete communities work is basically looking at areas of growth, so we were able to adjust the targets to be specific to those areas. And we integrated these targets into the Complete Communities Alternate Futures Report. And this Alternate Futures Report also links to the MOCP update. So it is all these reports have been connected and linked and are aligned on the topic of housing need. This is an example of how we took the projections from the Housing Needs Report and transformed them into 25-year projections and then broke them down by unit types and attached versus detached. So this is a sample of the results. And then these are the results for 2050 for each LAP. So it's not necessarily, Mill Bay is not Area A, they aren't equivalent. But that is how many attached versus detached homes. And that's based on historic built form and need. So these are the results that are later integrated into complete communities. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Patrick.
Great. Thank you so much, Renee. And it's nice to be back here in front of the ASC. For those who don't know, my name is Patrick Oistrakh. I'm a senior planner with Modus Planning Design and Engagement. And with Renee's team, we performed some community engagement to get some qualitative results into the Housing Needs Report. To help substantiate and also to supplement the results of the housing need numbers. And so we conducted 3 activities for broad-based and targeted community engagement over this period. It was in June of 2024. This included an online questionnaire, which was available to all residents of the electoral areas in the Cowichan Valley. And we also conducted interviews with specific stakeholders and service providers. And then we also facilitated a housing inequity workshop for those experiencing precarious housing, homelessness, and their service providers. Next slide. To reach out to the public and make sure that they could be involved in the process, we did quite a bit of advertising in the community. So there was the Plan Your Couch and website, as well as the newsletter which was sent out. We advertised on social media. We sent out email invitations. And we also sent formal letters to certain groups and First Nations to get involved. And so just a snapshot of some of those communication methods to make sure people would engage with this project. Next slide. And so by the numbers, we received about 539 online questionnaires. So a really strong number, especially for a community like the Cowichan Valley. Really proud of the amount of participation with that online questionnaire. We had about 26 registrants for the workshop on housing and equity and 7 service provider interviews. So good participation, and I think the results speak for that. So next slide, please. Essentially what we heard, we divided the engagement into kind of 2 pieces. So there's current needs and challenges, and then there's future needs and opportunities. So in terms of current needs and challenges, what we heard is that folks would really like to see more and larger indoor and outdoor spaces. So I think they see that, you know, much of the product that comes in is smaller, and in terms of unit sizes and in terms of yards. And so certainly something that was noted in the online questionnaire. We also heard that home improvements for older homes is something that folks could use supports on. Affordability is a key challenge, as is obvious, I think, to most. There's a lack of affordable options on the market right now in the Cowichan Valley. There's a lack of rental homes, and a lack of housing for seniors, young families, and students, which was noted to us. We also heard about high land and construction costs, possibly contributing to this affordability challenge. We heard from folks that development barriers exist. So thinking about the rules and regulations that maybe prevent development from happening in the first place. And we also heard that a key challenge is maybe that, or a key need would be greater collaboration between governments and other levels of government. In terms of future needs and opportunities, just on the next slide. We heard that affordability is going to be a major need in the future. So folks mentioned increased supports for residents would be really helpful, increased diversity of home options and tenures. So not just looking at ownership, but also looking at other models of housing like rental and co-op housing and just diversifying that stock. We also heard about supportive and transitional housing being really important for those who can't access either of the ownership or rental market because it is already too expensive for many. Governance and collaboration is another big theme. So we heard about reducing those development barriers that exist, to reduce red tape and bureaucracy, and to let more housing be built. Collaboration with First Nations would also be seen as a key opportunity in the future, especially with the Cowichan tribes and the Malahat First Nations. We heard that there's opportunities there to kind of work together and build more housing. And again, collaboration with other levels of government being another key opportunity. We also heard that infrastructure and services are going to be really important to link this new growth, this new housing, with the types of services and the infrastructure that communities need in order to be complete. And so keen to see how this also integrates with the Complete Communities work. So that's really important. Next slide. So with the results of the engagement and with the results of the H&R method that Renee explained, we've incorporated a few objectives and policies into the modernized official community plan for the electoral areas, all within this policy chapter called Make Distinct and Complete Communities. So there's 3 objectives that we've added. The first around strengthening those partnerships for that greater collaboration between the CVRD and housing sector, really to streamline development processes. We added another objective around supporting housing that meets the needs of specific populations that are in core housing need, and then exploring as-of-right zoning for nonprofit or below-market housing in areas that are well served by transit and amenities. And then in terms of the policies, in that same policy chapter, we included a policy around encouraging a greater housing supply of units with the aim of ensuring vacancy rates that are above 3% and housing supply across the electoral areas that meet those each of those components that Renee was explaining about from that latest housing needs report. We also added a policy around supporting transitional and temporary modular shelters. This was identified to us as a major gap in the housing system right now, especially in the electoral areas. So wanting those to be around or located near frequently serviced bus routes for those who are at risk or experiencing homelessness. And finally, one policy as well to support affordable below market and workforce housing on CVRD-owned land. And so with that, the housing needs report is can be publicized. It's completed. We're presenting it to you folks today. We will then move on to updating the Complete Communities Alternate Futures work, as well as the modernized official community plan, and with the hopes of bringing those forward to you, well, at least the official community plan by the end of the year here. So that wraps up. If there are any questions, I think Renee and I would be pleased to answer any of them. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, and I will just ask if you could lower your presentation so I can see the rest of my colleagues that are joining us remotely. Excellent. And clearly this will lead into our next. So I have Directors Martman, then Wilson, then Segal. Director Martman, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation and the information. I find it, wow, looking out 25 years, that's, I think, beyond my lifetime. So I like to think that way. I just have a very short question. It's around the policy that you're suggesting where it's tied to rates greater than 3%. And I'm wondering, I thought, if I remember right, that's a hard metric for us to know within the Cowichan Valley. How would we be able to know when we hit 3%?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there certainly are other avenues to discover that number or to make assumptions about that number. So if that percentage rate it's far more available, the data is far more available for local municipalities than it would be for electoral areas, and so we could use an analog or use those numbers as kind of the basis, perhaps, for the greater region. That would be my suggestion. So taking a look at the vacancy rates in Duncan, in North Cowichan, Lake Cowichan, and Ladysmith as sort of an intermediary number for the greater region if the data doesn't exist. Ideally, we would push the CMHC or other organizations that verify these numbers to publish reports or to publish data for a more granular level like the electoral areas.
Okay, thanks. Only question. Thanks,
sorry, I'll also add that there are other proxies that you could use. They wouldn't be perfect, but there are ways to assess, number of new units built, especially in the secondary rental market, basement suites. So single family, like a detached dwellings with a suite, we're going to assume that basement suite could be another rental unit, and you could compare like newly built to number of renters moving in to kind of assess how many of those units are immediately being occupied. There's also methods of just understanding, how many units are there on the rental market, and comparing that to with number of renters. Unfortunately, there are data limitations in smaller communities where the CMHC doesn't do that calculation, but there are alternatives to help communities assess the health of the rental market.
Right, and just a comment, if I may, Chair.
Proceed.
Yeah, I guess I would be looking for some enabling language there, because I guess I hate to handcuff the future to say it's greater than 3% when it's hard to sort of find that, perfect number. So anyways, look forward to maybe seeing that down the road.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Patrick. That's good stuff there. And we all know, we've talked about this over and over and over again ad infinitum about the needs for housing and everything else. Now, one of the things that you've brought up, and I don't know which slide number it was because there weren't any slide numbers on there, was I think it was on the needs and challenges page. And you've mentioned there development barriers. You mentioned development barriers, or to try and reduce those development barriers on the following page, and thereby hangs the problem. We can build all sorts of things, but as long as those barriers are there, and the time it takes for a developer to propose something till the time that something's actually done can be years. Well, guess what? In that time, costs have doubled, and it no longer becomes affordable or attainable. There is another mention that you've got there of greater governmental cooperation. It doesn't exist. We have to deal with the MOTI, and backwards and forwards it goes with the developers, with our planning department, and with MOTI and all the other people that are in there. I will get to a question in a minute, I promise, but this is a bit of a rant here. We know what we need. We know what we can build. We know what we're capable of. And yet we are being held back by all sorts of rules, regulations, and red tape. I'm speaking from experience here right now. I have a situation in my area where the development has been going on for 2 years, and yet it's been sent back for another look. When are we going to get this changed? How are we going to get this changed? Let's get going and actually build these things. Less barriers, less and all the rest of it. What's the answer here? How do we do it?
Would either
Great,
of
thank
you
you.
like to have a crack at that? Go ahead,
I'd be
Patrick.
happy to. Yeah, thank you for the comments there, and I think that's a sentiment that's shared in many places, and it's partially the reason why the provincial government has tabled this housing legislation to allow more housing within single detached zones as a right within zoning. It's another reason why one of the policies that we've listed here in the OCP, or an objective, is to explore this idea of as of right zoning for below market and affordable housing projects. So I think there's more to this than simply reducing the process barriers in terms of zoning, in terms of development applications. There's also the limitations of the infrastructure servicing in many communities in the electoral areas. So that's often a barrier as well. So I would hope that through the OCP update that we've been working on over the last many years, that basically the reduction in land use designations, we had approximately 166 across all of the 9 electoral areas, into a set of 20, would standardize some of these land use designations across the region, create a little bit more certainty and consistency across the electoral areas, so that if a developer wants to do a project in electoral area F versus electoral area A, it's the same rules, it's the same density provisions, it's the same policies that apply. So the idea here is that we're standardizing a lot of policies, a lot of regulations across the 9 electoral areas. And then I think in terms of those other barriers like infrastructure and servicing, we have to be a bit more strategic, and we have to keep accessing those grants and those funding opportunities from other levels of government.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to follow up if possible, please.
Please proceed.
Let me be a little bit insular here. Area C has some of the best infrastructure that there is in the whole of the 9 areas. It is brilliant, it has been well planned, and it's capable of expansion. And yet, development and MOTI problems are holding us back. So, let me speak for Area C here. What are we going to do about the development problems that we've got here and the holdups that come from the other thingies here? Same thing as I said before. Here in Area C, we're great. We got good stuff. And yet we're still being held up. No question.
Thank you for that. And Ms. Chirolf is entering into the fray. Ms. Chirolf, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to sort of contribute some information in response to Director Wilson's comments, and I understand there are some challenges at the current time in Cobble Hill, as there are in many of the communities. What I wanted to suggest is that staff come back with a report specifically in relation to some of the servicing challenges that we're having, and we can comment on Cobble Hill at that time. This is unfolding in response somewhat to recent board resolution. And so I think it would be timely for staff to, both planning and engineering staff, to report to you and have you consider that information. So you have all the facts in front of you at the time. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Charelf. So I just want to note, Director Markman, are you hoping for a round two, or did you just leave your hand up? Thank you. I've got, on my list, I've got Director Segal, Acton, McClinton, and myself as well. Are there any other directors like to be put on the first round speakers list? Seeing none, I will go to Director Segal in the boardroom.
Thank you so much. So my question is about that slide with the squiggly line, and it had the where is growth possible, and then we have the chart with the different areas and certain targets. I'm just wondering if those numbers are they attainable within the draft MOCP growth containment boundaries? Are they attainable with current water and sewer servicing, or you've mentioned a lot about the lack of that infrastructure? So I guess just reflecting across the whole valley, we have some areas, you know, with real water scarcity or servicing scarcity, and others that have more availability. What influenced those specific numbers for each area? Is it, the land use in the growth containment boundaries? Is it the whole OCP? What's actually possible now?
Yeah, so I'll maybe, do you want me to start off, Renee, and then I'll pass it on to you if that's okay? So we did complete, so with the results of the housing needs report, we did an additional capacity analysis based on the land use designations in the official community plan. And we do have the capacity available to accommodate this these unit numbers, and so that is something that we looked at. I'll maybe pass it on to Renee to talk a little bit about more what goes on with those numbers.
Yeah, okay, so the numbers themselves are all from the electoral area specific calculations. So that is the government mandated kind of calculation. But then to link it to the growth containment boundaries or the LAP boundaries, the first step was to kind of understand what ratio of each built form. So, for example, in an LAP versus its entire electoral area, what percentage of the townhomes were currently within that LAP? What percentage of the detached homes were currently in that LAP? And then we would apply a similar ratio. So assuming growth, majority of growth would end up within the LAP, within a serviced area. There was some, and this will be discussed further in the following presentation, but there were cases where we could not meet targets without adding more into the attached built form than from detached. So in some cases, we did hit, maximum capacity in a serviced area, and then we're still short on targets, in which case some of the units were shuffled around. But yes, it is possible from a projection standpoint. Obviously, this doesn't take into account development pressures, things like that. But just from a space perspective, it is possible to meet the unit targets within the serviced areas.
Thank you for that. Director Acton.
Thank you. I think I've had like 2 elections since we started this process, and I'm getting kind of like, when are we going to be done? Feeling. Patrick, so once this OCP is done, it's been touted that it's going to be this going to make life easier for us. But how I understand it is really life is not going to be easy for us until we have the bylaws that go with this new OCP. So when can we expect that to happen? Because we've had the pressure from the province to tighten up, in which I'm not sure, like, it would be great to know if we actually have done all we can to kind of expedite some things, because I have to admit, and I was talking to our CAO yesterday about it, 90% of my phone calls are people's frustration with housing in some way, or the rules, or what can they do with their property. So as far as I can tell, we are not in line with what Island Health seems like we're doing our own thing, Island Health is doing their own thing, and MOTI is doing their own thing. And so it's become like really frustrating. And I guess, okay, that's a bit of a rant. So thanks to Director Wilson for starting the rants. I kind of got onto that too. But my question is, when is it going to be done and actually in effect? So working for us.
Yeah, maybe just I see Anna also has her hand up, but I can start off by saying that, you know, I think this new provincial housing legislation has certainly increased the amount of time that we expected to take to bring you the MOCP to readings and adoption, partially because the whole range of bills introduced a new way of planning across the province. So we had to take into consideration these bills as we were, you know, close to putting it across the finish line. So I think we're actually a bit ahead of most communities right now, because folks who hadn't started an OCP update are going to be doing that next year, and they have to finish it by 2025. We've also had Island Health take a look at the draft OCP, and they have sent us their comments. Most actually have been very positive about what is included in our policy chapters. We've tried to integrate their guidelines around safe septic tanks and lot sizes into our structure for land use designations and density as well. So I think, you know, it certainly has taken a bit more time than we anticipated. I'd like to put a lot of that on the provincial legislation changes that have come through at the end of 2023, and we've been working all year to essentially align ourselves with that legislation, and then to essentially complete another housing needs report, given that requirement in the legislation.
Thanks for that. So before I go to Director Acton for a follow-up, and I'll go to Ms. Chirel first, I'd kind of like to, this is a really important discussion, and that's why I think all of this should be, we should continue along these lines. But we're talking about housing needs report here, and let's try and stay focused on that. Though I think Director Acton asked a brilliant question. If I gleaned from what you were saying correctly, you were inquiring about when is the zoning that the enacting rules going to be in place. So if I could turn to Ms. Chirel, are you able to answer that question and provide additional comments?
Thank you, Chair. If you recall, staff presented committee with the work plan for 2024 and 2025 a few months ago, and we talked about the process for developing for finalizing the modernized official community plan, and for also developing the comprehensive zoning bylaw, and we've targeted the end of 2025 for that work. And I want to mention that Lauren Wright will be presenting this afternoon at the regular ESC on the comprehensive zoning bylaw. So if there are specific questions about the comprehensive zoning bylaw, they could be addressed by Lauren at that time. And just to reiterate Patrick's comments on the provincial requirements, I think what we ended up with was probably a 12 to 18 month delay in our work as a result of the requirements that the province imposed on the CDRD and other local governments. Thank you.
Director Acton.
Thank you. So, yeah, it's good to hear that reiterated again. I think it's like too long to make, we can't be waiting for that to help us in any way with our housing crisis at the moment. And, I think some of these changes that we're making are making a difference, but, or it seems like it. But I guess my question would be, well, what else can we do right now, right here, right now? Like, and get some of this, or can we look at what the province has regulated for us? Can we do better, or can we go back and see if we could have done something more? I guess is my question here. I'm not a planner, so I'm sure I got lots of planners shaking their heads in the background maybe, but it just doesn't feel like we've done all that we can for the here and now, or it feels like we're holding back a little bit, and I just don't think we can wait until 2025 until everything comes out, all smooth. In a perfect world, that would have been great, but it's at the moment, and especially I think in Shawnigan Lake, we feel it because we're the closest to the city. And, so there's lots of families and requirements for like student housing and that kind of thing. So anyway,
So, Ms.
Yeah.
Sherelf, it's a fairly broad question she's asking. It's important. I don't know if now is exactly the time to be going down that road, but do you have any comment, and perhaps maybe we can have a broader discussion about, we've got this piece and that piece and the other, how can we improve upon that? Go ahead.
I can keep it short. Chair, I will say first that there is also work happening in short-term rental regulation and enforcement to hopefully free up some of that short-term rental accommodation for longer-term housing. And then staff are also working on potential regulatory changes, which will continue to provide opportunities for additional housing. There was also a housing report that staff presented to the Committee of the Whole recently, which was referred to a future meeting following discussions on regional planning and RGS. And so that report, I anticipate that report could be brought back to the Committee of the Whole for a broader discussion with the municipal directors and electoral directors around housing options and opportunities.
Thank you. I've got Director McClinton next, and then myself.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this will be a quick question. Just looking for your best insights on this. It doesn't have to be super exact, but we've had a lot of consistency both federally and provincially with our elected parties in power. And I'm just curious with a couple non-confidence votes in the federal parliament, and we're in the midst of a provincial election. What's in the event of a change, specific, I guess more so for the provincially, what are you guys what's the odds you're gonna have to go back to the drawing board on this kind of stuff? How insulated is your work, moving forward in the event of a change?
Patrick, Renee?
So, yeah, I can maybe take this on. I think for the greater part, the OCP is fairly insulated from that work. I think it's the zoning bylaw work that would be most impacted by any kind of changes at the provincial level.
Anything to add, Renee?
No, the calculation method would be potentially changed, but hard to predict.
Yeah, a little bit of a crystal ball gazing kind of question, and we don't know until we know. Anything further, Director McClinton?
All good. Thank you.
Okay, I read this report with and the next report with a great deal of interest because I get the calculations. I get that the first round of housing needs assessment was not particularly well received across the province. You've got strict parameters in which to develop this one. But where I'm going with this is that I think it's on page 4 of the report. It speaks of 82% of the population growth being outside the local area plan boundaries or growth containment boundaries. 79% of the dwelling growth has been outside the growth containment boundaries, and you know that's a historical sort of look at where our development community and where builders and individuals have been going to build new housing stock. So, you know, I look at this and I think I read somewhere in one of these reports that it's the aim and objective of the provincial government to reverse that and change it to where we have 80% of the growth happening within the municipal boundaries and the growth containment boundaries. And changing behavior isn't an easy thing to do. And I get that that's what our provincial government wants us to do. So I'm looking at this saying that historically growth has been in where the land has been cheaper, where there, you know, maybe viewed that there's less regulation, more space, and I'm looking at the Cowichan Lake area specifically because it wasn't that long ago where our social service agencies were sending people to go and find accommodation there because it was considerably cheaper than within the municipal and the growth containment boundaries. So with developers focused on profit and not on highest best use or affordability, that sort of thing, can you give me some hope that this change from 80 in the rural to 80 in the municipal is even remotely achievable? Is because I don't think that we will be able to change that attitude, for sure not in 5 years, maybe not even in 25 years. So it's a monumental ask, and you have any insights on that?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. I think one of the major changes that we're seeing through this housing legislation is a change in the process of how we do development. So if an application comes in for a rezoning application, as an example, that aligns with the OCP, a public hearing isn't necessary. There is essentially, with the small scale multi-unit housing as well, as of right zoning for additional units on these single detached zoned properties. So ultimately what ends up happening is a lot of these types of developments that align with the zoning that we've just changed and that align with the OCP are streamlined. They are fast-tracked to a certain extent, which is an incentive for the types of housing that we identify in the OCP and that we identify in the zoning bylaws being needed in the community. So that's perhaps one way of looking at it. It's a systemic change, which I think is probably quite powerful, especially in municipalities where the scale of this small scale multi-unit housing legislation is going to be quite a bit larger and quite a bit more impactful than in an electoral area.
Any thoughts, Renee?
No, I agree with Patrick. I do think that because of these changes, that it'll naturally, the development community will follow.
Thanks for that. I'm not nearly as optimistic. I'm kind of viewing this as when there's 27 things on a list to do to go from 1 unit to 4 units on a property. The elimination of a need for a public hearing is like one of 27 things. So, maybe a slight advantage to a developer, but the mom and pop owners of that land that might want to embark on putting a fourplex where there's a single family home today, it's still going to be seen to be a very daunting exercise for someone who's not immersed in the culture of development. So that was my version of a rant. I'll go to Director Wilson next.
There is one more thing I can add to that. I think that when we're comparing fourplexes and a single family dwelling, there is also a lot of demand for more affordable built forms. So I think we're talking about the development community, but there is also a high degree of demand for these homes. And so I think that demand also will influence the choices that developers are making.
Thanks for that. Director Wilson, round two.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to make it clear, first of all, that my comments just now, my little rant, were not aimed at our very capable planning staff. That was not the case at all. It's aimed more directly at the kind of systemic changes which need to be made here on all levels of the what we have to cope with here, with all the different things. So if there was any indication that it was aimed at individuals, it was not. We need to change things, and we need to change things very quickly, because as you say, 2025, 5 years, 10 years, we'll still be in the same situation. So anyway, thank you for that. Just another comment rather than a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wilson. So I'm looking around the room, don't see any further hands up. We've had a good kick at this. I think that do we have a resolution that we have to engage in here for this one? Let me just go to that. Recommended resolution. So we have a recommended resolution. Just to give you an idea, I think we'll maybe deal with this resolution, then have a quick 5-minute break and then come back. So is there anyone around the boardroom or remote that would like to move the recommended resolution? We have a mover, or do we have a seconder? We have a seconder. Ms. Ferguson, would you please read this resolution, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that the Cowichan Valley Regional District receive the 2024 Housing Needs Report for the Cowichan Valley Regional District electoral areas.
Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Were there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Renee, Patrick, thank you very much for your assistance on this. Good work. And clearly it's an issue near and dear to our hearts, and thank you for the work that you've done on this so far. Thank you. With that, it's 10:55. I think we'll take 5 or 6 minutes, and we'll be right back at it at, say, 5 after 11. Welcome back, everyone. Ms. Ferguson, where are we now?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're on R2, report from the Strategic Initiatives Division, Recomplete Communities Grant 1 final report. We have a presentation from Aaron Licker and Chelsea Whitty from Licker, Geospatial, and Dialogue.
And I think we have Ms. Garnett at the lectern. So, Ms. Garnett, would you like to turn on is the lectern, there you are. Excellent. And would you like to introduce this, please, Ms. Garnett?
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'll just like to give a couple of words of explanation. So as was said, this is a report on the Complete Communities Grant number 1 from the UBCM. The CBRD was successful in 2 grants to UBCM for Complete Communities funding, and this staff report presents on the final deliverable and process of Complete Community number 1 grant. And as said, we have Aaron and Chelsea here to present. Just briefly, though, there were some amendments to the Attachment A Alternate Futures Report, and so hard copies have been provided to the directors in attendance and ledge services. It will be updated on for the official record as well. The Plan Your Couch and also has the current version, so it is up to date. There's a summary of changes has been provided as well to the area directors in attendance, and it's specific to the Honeymoon Bay Missachi Lake Paul D local area plan inputs related to water servicing and sewer servicing, and that will be more described in the presentation by Aaron. So with that, I will pass it over to their capable hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Chelsea, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Aaron Licker, Principal Licker Geospatial. I have a nice presentation for you folks. It's dense and data heavy, so I'll try to speak clearly to it, and I please would ask you to just keep your questions to the end. And let me share my screen. Let me go full screen here. Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Sounds good.
Perfect. Okay, so this is our presentation today. I'm Aaron Licker, and I'm joined by Chelsea from Dialogue. This is a substantial presentation. I'm going to cover a few things here, but mainly I'm going to give an overview of the project. We're going to speak to the engagement that was completed for the project. I'm going to briefly touch on the local plan area profiles, which was the first major deliverable of the work. And then I'm going to focus more substantively on the second major deliverable, which was the alternate futures report. Then I'll close with next steps. The process for this project, what I'll get to here is just how it fits in with the other work that's been discussed today, mainly the modernized official community plan and the interim housing needs report. So this complete communities assessment right here fits or nests quite nicely within the local area plan component of the MOCP, which again is part of the MOCP more generally. Our work has been heavily informed by MOCP land use policy, specifically around how we determine alternate futures and potential outcomes of land use policy. And to drive those outcomes, we use the results of the interim housing needs report that Renee and Patrick presented previously. But this is basically how everything fits together. The process that we've been working under is presented here on this slide. We're talking about phase 1 and phase 2 of the complete communities assessment, which is the first grant that Ali alluded to earlier. The process has been quite involved, but basically we did some significant work gathering data, developing kind of a scope of work that met the objectives of the project. We did a substantial amount of documentary review and data collection. My colleagues at Dialogue did a wonderful job engaging the community to determine goals and objectives as part of the overall local area plan process. And then we did an initial assessment of all the local area plans. Subsequently, we worked with the CVRD to develop some cogent land use scenarios and some possible inputs for futures in these in local plan areas. We assess these again, and then that's our report. I'll get into this in a lot more detail, but this is just the general structure of the work. And then I'll just pass it over to Chelsea to talk about engagement very briefly here.
Hi, thank you. So this is a high-level overview, and I just wanted to highlight that on Plan Your Cowichan, there's an extensive summary report on the engagement process, including the feedback and how it influenced the different components feeding into the local area plan. So what we did in step 1 under the Complete Communities #1 grant was a series of ideas, fairs, workshops. So there was 18 in total for each electoral area. And we had significant participation, 400 participants in total, obviously with different varying participation across the electoral areas. That distribution is highlighted in the report. Following the Ideas Fairs workshops, we posted an online survey that was the same content that was covered at the in-person workshops, so that people could follow up with more detailed responses, or they could complete the survey if they were unable to attend the workshop in person. So there was 118 completed surveys, and again, we had different varying participation by areas. So combining that feedback from the workshops and the surveys, the output and the result was refinement to the draft vision statements for each of the local area plans, refinement to the draft descriptions for each of the local area plans, which highlighted the current conditions and the character and unique areas within each plan area. And then it also fed into the Complete Communities assessment and the understanding of the current conditions relative to completeness under the 4 lenses: housing, daily needs, transportation, and infrastructure. Next slide. In the second step of the local area plan process, which again still falls under the Complete Communities grant #1, we had meetings with the advisory planning commissions. We had, I believe, 5 formal meetings where the alternate futures profiles report, the local area profiles report, and the alternate futures reports were shared, discussed, and we requested formal feedback from APC. There were follow-up meetings that were held, and these all occurred in spring 2024. So there was approximately 15 meetings in total, and we received formal comments from APC. Similar timeline in spring of 2024, we met with First Nations and had consultation meetings and follow-up conversations with the participating First Nations. So Subasset, who are adjacent to Area I and Area F local area plans, and the Malahat Nation adjacent to local area plans A and B. And the opportunity here was to discuss future development plans from their perspective on their land and how we can incorporate that into both the LAP and the scenario planning process. So taking that combined feedback, the output of that work was for Aaron and his team to make updates on the local area plan profiles report and then make refinements to the alternate futures report, which he'll be sharing here.
Thanks, Chelsea. And I think I'll just get right into it. So just as I was mentioning, this project had 2 major deliverables. The first was the local plan area profiles. This was a pretty straightforward process. What we did is we revisited the community goals, and then we developed indicators, which I'll touch on in a few minutes here, on how we could, monitor, evaluate, and hopefully plan to close gaps in community completeness in the rural setting, that is the CVRD. Then we gathered data from many sources, which I'll touch on in a second, and we executed spatial analysis to measure these indicators, and then we determined kind of performance, and we also identified gaps and opportunities to close these to improve the performance of the indicators. Then we followed that up with a report on the current state of each local plan area. Project inputs, the main ones are all presented here. The big one was the draft MOCP. So that one was a huge component of inputs because fundamentally it indicates how the land will be used in the CRD for the years to come. We also included a substantial amount of work from the draft local area plans themselves, which are part of the MOCP. We specifically used the outputs from the interim housing needs report that was presented on previously. We used elements from the regional transportation plan. We took feedback and formal referral comments from the APCs. We received a huge amount of data, information, and support from CVRD planning, as well as CVRD GIS. And we also engaged with the Malahat Nation and Subasa Nation to solicit information for some developments on their lands. These are the outcomes of the local area, local plan area profiles. I won't get into this too much because we'll be talking this at length in the alternate futures, but just to give you a sense of performance between the various jurisdictions on the metrics that we chose, which was housing, transportation, daily needs, and servicing. Now I'm going to speak more substantively to the alternate futures report, talk about methods for about 10 minutes, and then I'll get into results for each LAP. So this report it's the second analytical phase of this project, and it's a big one. Basically, we did scenario modeling for 2 scenarios for each local plan area, and had to reevaluate metrics for everything for both the current and future state. And to do that, to start it off, we reviewed the outcomes from the first phase of the work to understand where the gaps were. And then we worked with CVRD staff to develop policies and actions that could materially affect community completeness. Then we delineated these into cohesive scenarios. And then we developed 2 separate scenarios, one which was kind of the MOCP as is scenario, another one which was fundamentally a higher growth scenario with a few tweaked assumptions. Then we built out our scenarios to reevaluate the data in the future. Then we, of course, noted any additional gaps that we found as a result of growth and land use change. And then we made some small edits to that, and then we prepared our report. The indicators that we used in this project, we had four main buckets, as I mentioned: housing, transportation, infrastructure, and daily needs. Under housing, we had 3 here. The first was the diversity of housing options. So we selected this because this indicator is quite reflective of the MOCP. So the MOCP has suggested some land use change in many parts of the CVRD, and that policy-based action should yield new land use typologies and new developments of different varieties in all the LAPs. We also selected housing cost for a similar reason. We recognize that the cost of housing is quite expensive in the CVRD. The theory with this project is if you increase the supply of more affordable housing, that might reduce housing costs. And finally, we focused on housing affordability, and that was to understand, if residents could afford to purchase a particular type of home in their community, and if we made more types of homes available, would that materially affect housing affordability? On transportation, we looked at 2 main categories. The first was intersection density. This is a proxy indicator for basically how accessible a community is, how safe it is for pedestrians to walk, what your travel speeds are, and kind of generally how clustered your uses are. We measured this one for our current conditions report. We did not progress it into the alternate futures report because the CVRD is very low jurisdiction over its roads, and as such, we didn't feel it was necessary to measure this. The second measure was around access to planned transportation networks, specifically the Cowichan Valley Trail and East Connector. We selected this one because we recognize that this is a major piece of infrastructure. It has the possibility of moving the dial on mode share, and it could promote active transportation and basically sustainable mode share into the future. For daily needs, we had one composite metric, which was access to daily needs. This was measured as reasonable access to eight amenities. These are amenities that we believe are important based on the goals of the community, as well as what is measurable. You'll note we don't have shoreline access on here. We had intended to include it in the project, but it was challenging because it was very hard to get that data and also determine where the access points were. One of our recommendations is to conduct a further study into that area. So we just have these amenities here. We also looked at infrastructure, and this is a big one and obviously near and dear to everyone's heart on this call. And what we wanted to look at was the population residing in both water and sewer serviced areas, both now and into the future. This was a nice one to measure because it helps us understand if the MOCP was successful in accommodating in directing growth, but also if there's capacity in these systems to accommodate growth. We'll get that in a few slides here. We met with the Malahat Sebastopol Nations several times in this project. There was some early engagement in 2023 to gauge their interest in this work. In spring 2024, we met with them to present the results for each LAP area. And as a result of those presentations, they expressed interest in incorporating their lands into the assessment to understand if they have a material impact on community completeness. We're not suggesting that CVRD has jurisdiction over those lands or CVRD planning has any substantial effect on how they treat their lands. However, what we wanted to understand is if we included those as part of a kind of a cohesive package or consider them as a major development, what would that mean for the community surrounding them? And I'll get to what that meant for Area I and ABC later on in the presentation as well. So now I'm going to talk about results. We have 9 areas to go through and 6 indicators and some gaps. So this is going to take some time. Hopefully this is going to be clear for everyone, and I'm happy to revisit it. This is during the question and answer period as well. Here's the composite outcome for all areas and all communities. What you can see here is the scenarios. Sorry, I'll reframe that. The blue that you see here is the current conditions. The golden color here is the scenario 1, which is the MOCP scenario, and then the kind of salmon color here is the second scenario we ran, which was fundamentally a higher growth scenario with some increased demand for attached housing. What you can see in all of these cases is that we don't see huge shifts in community completeness as a result of land use change, growth, and development. One of those reasons is structural. You just can't grow yourself out of some of these issues. Another is that, in some cases we're, fundamentally changing the character of an area. And the third is, this work exposes the limits of what the CVRD can do fundamentally to affect community completeness. That being said, in some areas there were substantial changes. You'll note in Area F, housing diversity significantly increased under the second scenario, same with Eagle Heights. In both in Mill Bay particularly, but as well to a lesser extent in Area I, we were able to accommodate growth in water serviced areas and sewer serviced areas. In some cases, if you squint very closely, you can see that specifically in Area B, but also in Area C, we were able to increase the number of folks who were able to access daily needs. So I'm going to talk about each one of these in detail. This is Area A, which is, of course, closest to the Capital Regional District, and on Highway 1 there, close to the Malahat Nation as well. It's, a fairly well built out area. It has many amenities, and it's close to many amenities. And it has a good capacity for growth. It's what we found, and is well serviced by water. In this scenario, for the scenarios, the first scenario, we assumed that it would be kind of traditional levels of growth, mostly in single detached dwellings. As we were focusing growth in the local area plan area, we would see a fairly substantial growth rate, about 1.81%. Under scenario 2, we included 2 major developments, Stonebridge and Ocean Terrace. I believe actually these unit attainments might have changed since we did the analysis. We also suggested that under these scenarios, demands would shift more towards attached housing, and we'd see a very high growth rate in the area. This is the results of that growth modeling. I've presented on this before, so I'll just refresh everyone's mind on how to interpret these maps. What you're seeing here with the colors is a gradient of new units in terms of density. So the very light color here, which is lilac, is basically just modest infill. So that would be either a secondary suite added to a single detached dwelling, or perhaps the very odd subdivision. The darker colors here represent unit attainments that are from townhouse developments or from a major new subdivision with potentially attached units. You can see here where we anticipate growth to occur under the MSCP, which is mainly structural Trans-Canada Highway, and obviously for scenario 2, you can see the Stonebridge and Ocean Terrace developments. In terms of housing, what you can see here is a substantial shift away from single unit homes towards more attached forms, both in scenario 1 and scenario 2, which of course increases housing diversity. Scenario 2, you can see here, we assumed that Stonebridge and Ocean Terrace would have a fairly substantial amount of secondary suites incorporated into their developments. For the affordability metric here, just to help folks interpret this, the dark green is what folks who want to purchase a single detached home could reasonably afford based on family incomes. The light green is for attached dwellings, and the tan here is for folks looking to rent secondary suites. How we did this assessment is we looked at the diversity of incomes in an area, which are shown here. These are the median incomes by head of household. So a household headed by a 45 to 54-year-old in Area A has a family income around $170,000 a year. Those folks can afford at current mortgage rates detached home, kind of if they're in the upper deciles of their family incomes. So basically, high earners or medium to high earners can afford a detached home. In this category here, you can see here that incomes are lower for seniors. Most seniors, if they were buying based on income qualification alone, only the top decile could afford a single detached home in Area A. We were presenting this for information purposes only, but basically we're saying that, by and large, many homes in Area A are available to most strata of family incomes in the community. However, we note that detached homes are mostly out of reach, except for the highest earners in the middle-aged category. In terms of access, we note that most of the Area Plan A is highly accessible to the Cowichan Valley Trail, the East Connector. We note that this is largely unchanged between the scenarios, although with scenario 2, because we have the major developments, the attainment remains relatively static in comparison to the current conditions. You'll see here on access, everyone in Area A has access to all the amenities we suggested. This is in the 7.5-minute drive. There's great access in Area A. It's fantastic. It's an amenity-rich area. In terms of servicing, what we did here is we looked at where population was, we anticipate population to land. and if it was in a currently water serviced area or currently water sewer serviced area. As you can see here, while we're unsure of the overall capacity of the water system to accommodate this growth, we do know that the land use designations have enough capacity to sit residents within water service areas. And similar, we know that the same for sewer service areas. This jump in scenario 2 is we assume that both Stonebridge and Ocean Terrace would have their own sewer systems. In terms of overall outcomes for Area A, we can see that housing diversity changes a little bit with the introduction of the attached forms. Unfortunately, housing cost decreases. What we noticed for this area and all other areas, for the scope or for the rest of them, is that the single detached with suite housing form is quite expensive. So if we anticipate more of those to be built, unfortunately, it does increase the overall cost of housing. We can see that generally access to extra transportation networks goes down a little bit, and that's just because there's some growth that's more than 3 kilometers away from these networks. And generally we can fit or accommodate all growth in serviced areas with some degree of improvement with water and sewer servicing. I've hit on this before, but the remaining gaps for Area A is that the shift towards ground-oriented housing, or the focus on ground-oriented housing, that's specifically single attached dwellings and those as suites, does not dramatically affect housing diversity, costs, or affordability. We feel that shifting the focus more towards higher density attached units, townhouses or apartments could materially affect this, as well as perhaps a focus on market rental housing. Finally, and I'll say this for every single plan area, we strongly suggest detailed study into sewer and water system expansions. We've assumed that there is capacity for the most part. However, we haven't validated this. Currently, through the project, we didn't have much way of validating that information. That's Area A. I'm going to try to go through these with some rapidity given the time here, but here's Area B, which is Shawnigan Lake, which is a fundamentally gorgeous natural setting. There is a small amenity-rich village in the center of the LAP, and there is currently a decent diversity of housing, although that can be improved. For scenario B, for electoral area, area B, scenario 1, we again try to set growth within the growth containment boundary, and we use the targets from the housing needs report. For scenario 2, we had a slightly higher growth target, and we again assumed a shift towards more attached dwellings, and we assumed a higher growth rate for this scenario. These are the outcomes of the modeling that we did. You can see they're not substantially different. That's because we don't have very different growth rates between both scenarios. The biggest shift in scenario 2 is you can see there's slightly more population in proximity to the village over here, and slightly less than scenario 1. In terms of housing, housing diversity increases in these scenarios. While there is a substantial amount of land devoted towards higher density forms, what we noticed is that for the most part, we're going to see continued development of single detached homes, small subdivisions, or inclusion of secondary suites. In terms of housing affordability, Area B is slightly more affordable than Area A, as shown previously. Almost half of all income deciles across all age groups can afford a detached or attached home. And then if we include secondary suites into the quantum, we can hit most of the incomes in the area, which is great. So in terms of access, the area is highly accessible to the Cowichan Valley Trail. That's unchanged between scenarios. In terms of daily needs here, we note that there is two gaps in daily needs. The first is in libraries, the second is the grocery store. when we allocated growth in this area, we materially affected these somewhat. So in both scenario 1 and scenario 2, more folks are proximal to the library and to the grocery store, which has modestly improved. In terms of servicing, what we noticed from our modeling is that the anticipated growth in the community could not be accommodated in water serviced areas. What I'm saying by that is the MOCP densities that we used were insufficient, so we ended up spilling growth kind of out into areas outside of current water servicing. And a similar thing that occurred with sewer servicing. So this is irrespective of system capacities. It's just saying that the development capacity in these areas did not match up with the servicing capacity. In terms of outcomes, then you can see here that future growth in the area does increase housing diversity. In scenario 2, it actually we added some townhouses, so that it improved the housing cost quantum. Generally, access improved with both scenarios, but we had that issue with servicing as discussed. As with Area A, the current focus on single detached units, doesn't really shift our housing diversity or affordability. Obviously, promoting more folks to live in townhouses would help, but that's generally out of the CVRD's hands. You folks have been the land use designation, so that's pretty much all we can go by if the demand is only for single detached homes. And then the note on servicing here, basically, obviously increasing the service areas would change the metric as I've mentioned. This would need to be done in conjunction with a study to determine if there's actual capacity to accommodate that growth anyway. For Area C here, which is Cobble Hill, as mentioned, Cobble Hill is in a great position in the CRD as well. Again, it has great access to amenities. It has a nice little village and access to employment lands. Most of the community has a managed sewer system, and we believe there could be opportunity to grow there. We know that there isn't a grocery store that close to the area, but one could be added in the future as well. The growth assumptions we used for these areas was scenario 1 was 1.74%, which is substantial. Again, these numbers might seem high, and that's just because of how the housing needs assessment suggested some fairly substantial growth rates, but 2, the MOCP desires growth to be located within the urban containment boundary, which is synonymous with local area plan boundaries. You can see here in scenario 2, again, that shift to attached housing and slightly higher growth rate at 2%. Here are the outcomes of the work for the growth modeling. You can see here that in both scenarios, we did see some decent amounts of growth inside the village core, and most growth happening kind of to the west of the Trans-Canada Highway. Obviously, there's no growth here on Arbutus Ridge as that area is going to be built out. In terms of metric evaluation, we can see again, as with areas A and B, that housing diversity does increase in these scenarios. That's from the inclusion of attached housing. I also note that generally in this community, attached housing is more affordable. We do have some issues on detached housing, and secondary suites may not close the gap there. In terms of access, you can see here that growth does improve access to daily needs, specifically around community center and the library. We know there's still kind of some gaps around grocery stores as well. Not much has changed in water servicing. Basically, we can accommodate most of the anticipated growth in the water serviced area. Unfortunately, we can't see the same sewer serviced areas. In this scenario, we do know that, and this is a good one, both scenarios 1 and 2, they increase housing diversity, so growth can close the gap there. They can potentially lower housing costs a little bit, increase access to daily needs. Again, the remaining gaps are, for the study for sewer and water capacity, and we suggest that if, facilitating the inclusion of a grocery store could close the gap there on access. In this project, we also ran a scenario for combined LAPs of ABC. We did this to kind of understand if we allocated growth, if we pooled growth and allocated in these areas in combination, what would happen to close the gap of completeness. We also included in 3.2 the Malahat, development of the Malahat lands, which I'll get to in a second here. And we also included major developments. Here are the outcomes. So basically we have development being focused significantly in the south of Area A. This follows the draft of the waste management plan. In scenario 3.1, we used the current liquid waste management plan, which is from 1998, which focuses growth around the lake, interestingly enough, and also kind of very, very tightly in area A here. Shifting this growth does a little bit of work for us. It certainly increases housing diversity. It definitely allows us to increase access. So basically, focusing growth and including the Malahat land specifically puts more folks in areas that are highly proximal to amenities. In terms of servicing, we did assume the Malahat lands would be serviced with sewer and with water as well. So growth, allocating some growth to that area closes the gap for these metrics as well. Overall, we note that the combined ABC scenario for 3.2, we see the gap closing actually quite well for most of our metrics, except for housing cost, unfortunately. But the assumption here is that including these areas really is effective for including the Malahat land specifically is effective for closing the gap. And again, these are the same recommendations we have for the other areas. Area D, very briefly, we assumed a kind of growth rate of 1.64% for scenario 1 and 2.12 for scenario 2. The big changes in these scenarios, fundamentally is just higher growth rates and more focused demand for attached housing in scenario 2. What this means is we had a greater degree of housing diversity in scenario 2 than in scenario 1. We also note that with a shift towards attached forms and secondary suites, generally homes are affordable in this area. And especially if we think about attached units in area D, most of the middle incomes can afford to buy in this area. Access is unchanged between the scenarios for transportation, actually access to the Cowichan Valley Trail. We do know that focusing growth within Cow Bay's village core there does increase the accessibility metric for a lot of these amenities. Servicing is fundamentally unchanged in here as well. We have room for growth based on the MOCP to accommodate all growth in serviced areas. For area D, and this is actually hopefully a good news story, but we can see that a high degree of growth and a shift towards attached dwellings has the chance to close the gap on completeness, and we're seeing kind of positive changes in this area. For area DE, which is the combined Eagle Heights, Cook Silo Village area, this is an area that is well positioned for access because it's right next to Duncan. There are some challenges with hazard lands in this area, and we had some interesting conversations on the referral process around kind of how we want to accommodate growth. Based on the MOCP interim housing needs report and the land use that we have here, we know there's a fairly high anticipated growth rate at 2.2% for scenario 1 and 2.64% for scenario 2. That growth has been accommodated in this area both through infilling on single detached lands, some development of attached housing on Coachella Road, and some modest inclusion of residential above commercial in the employment lands. What's interesting in this area DE is that no single detached dwellings are affordable to kind of the median incomes of current residents, whereas attached ones are. Also note that substantial amounts of growth in the area do change housing diversity, and the inclusion of kind of apartments over commercial definitely increases the availability of housing in the area and the kind of the possibility for housing affordability to increase. Because the area is highly location efficient, we know that there's no changes with growth. The area is already 100% accessible to daily needs. Also, DE is completely serviced, so no changes there as well. So the big changes on the summary here is housing diversity obviously dramatically increases in scenarios. That's from this possibility of land use change in the area. We have kind of a greater degree of access just basically for active transportation networks of where we've put dwellings. Two big recommendations here. One is that we need to understand if you know the water service, which is provided by Duncan, can accommodate growth. And second, we need to understand you know if hazards you know are detrimental to growth in the area. This is a high hazard area. On area F here, we have we also included Poldy in this assessment, which is over here to the right, as well as the core area of Missachi Lake and Honeymoon Bay. The growth rates for this location are kind of interesting. For scenario 1, we had a slightly elevated growth rate inside the LAP. That's again from the HNR. For scenario 2, we included Poldy, as well as Pepples West and Couverton, which significantly increases the growth rate inside the LAP to about 4% per year, which is quite high. We assumed 700 units in Poldy, which is admittedly expansive. We did this basically to reflect the possibility of that area becoming a master planned area in the future. And there's Poldy looks like a very very dark red purple development in this mapping. This is the outcomes of growth for area F. Also note that we did assume that area F's sewer system and water system both could expand in the future beyond the current boundaries. And accordingly, we have some changes to servicing here. We didn't assume servicing for Poldy as part of this work. Poldy is entirely conceptual, so we had nothing really to go on as to what would happen there. But we note that water service, all growth can happen in water service area. Area F is abundant water. For sewer servicing, we assumed some modest expansion of the sewer system along South Shore Road. So some growth that occurred in the area here was accommodated in that area. We didn't assume. We recognize that further expansion could occur, but those areas are not. There's no plans in place right now. Overall, the inclusion of new forms of housing and movement to attached housing really changes housing diversity. And it also, as you can see here, we have some modest changes with water and sewer servicing. On area G, which is Saltaire, this one we ran 2 scenarios with the same growth rate. All we did is we assumed that in the second scenario there would be a shift to attached housing, and that there would be we'd focus growth in the original GCB as opposed to the updated one for the MOCP, which is what you can see here. Again, not huge changes as you can see from these two maps. Overall, in both scenarios, because of the assumption that there would be some demand for attached housing, we see this our housing diversity increases quite a bit. We note that for most residents at current incomes, housing is still quite unaffordable at the single detached scale, although townhomes and attached dwellings and secondary suites are affordable to most residents. Saltaire is obviously very, very close to Ladysmith, and as such is highly accessible, so growth doesn't change things there. And the area is of course 100% serviced by water and does not have sewer service, so there's no changes there either. So what we're seeing here is growth materially affects housing diversity and cost to a certain extent. There are some concerns in Area G around obviously drainage and slope stability. This may inhibit growth in the future. We strongly suggest further study in this area. I got 2 areas left and then I'll take questions. Sorry folks for the very long presentation here. On Area H, which is the diamond, we just assumed for this area that there'd be there's fairly substantial growth in comparison to current trends from the HNR. And second, that there would be a substantial development in the Bush Creek area for a mobile home park, which is shown here. That development, of course, increases housing affordability, increases access to new housing forms, and it also allows for potentially more affordable homes. Because Area H is already quite accessible, we didn't see many changes to the metric evaluation for access. And we assumed that the new development in Bush Creek would be serviced with water and not serviced with sewer. Here are the overall outcomes for the area. As you can see, no changes here. And then, yeah, of course, that inclusion of the new development may close the gap in some areas and will materially affect housing affordability. For Area I, which is UBO, we also included the subasset lands in this assessment, which are shown here in scenario 2. Fairly modest development in subasset lands, but we assume to be serviced with water and sewer. As such, there are some changes to the complete communities assessment attainment. Before I get to that, I'll just note that currently in this area, with current incomes and current home prices, single detached homes are unaffordable to current residents. Attached homes and secondary suites are, but there's a large affordability gap in Area I. What I want to show here is the effects of shifting growth in these scenarios. For scenario 1 for Area I, we did assume some development in the UBO lands phase development agreement area, which does decrease these accessibility metrics. For scenario 2, with the inclusion of subasset lands and shifting some growth away from those from the PDA, we see that access improves somewhat. Overall, we can see that growth can be accommodated in the sewer service in the serviced areas for UBO to some extent, although obviously the systems are not that large. And then for these other areas, for water, generally, we can stay at current levels if we do not if we include them out as subasset area and focus less growth in the phase development agreement area. And here's the results. Basically, housing diversity increases, affordability increases substantially with the inclusion of new housing forms. And as you can see here, we close the gap a little bit on water and sewer servicing. Okay, sorry for the blitzkrieg there, folks. I'm just going to talk about our final recommendations here. These are in our report as well, but basically we suggest that growth can be accommodated inside these sewer and water serviced areas. We need to understand how multifamily intensification relates to that. We know that growth can potentially increase, fund new systems. However, we don't have a capture mechanism in place yet, so we suggest that CBD develops a DCC bylaw so that if there are substantial multifamily developments, those can potentially pay for expansions. We suggest, based on our results from Malahat Subasset, continued engagement with all First Nations in the area. The inclusion of their lands was quite helpful for this work. We suggest individual studies for each lap to understand hazards, both climate-related and climate-induced, such as natural hazards for landslides. We suggest aligning the implementation phase of this project with the Climate Action Plan, which is some great ideas on how to grow sustainably. We suggest alignment in the implementation phase of this work, which is the next phase with the liquid waste management plan as well. The draft liquid waste management plan. We suggest development of amenity policy for each lab to close gaps on amenities. We also suggest the implementation of regional business licensing, which will help us kind of track kind of those amenities around grocery stores a bit more effectively. In terms of next steps, the second grant is underway. That's going to involve additional engagement with the APCs and First Nations. That project will also involve the development of implementation plans to kind of to basically create a framework for the policies and actions that I've shown in this work. And it'll also include a monitoring framework so that work can be repeated annually or on an as-needed basis to reevaluate complete community closures. And I'll just note, we did have some updates for Area F in the report. Basically, we, as I said, we amended some system boundaries to anticipate future development, and these changes are noted here. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and thank you everyone for coming along with me on that. Sorry for the very long presentation.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm going to turn to committee and create a list of, we've got Director Deck. Who else would like to pose questions in regards? And I think we'll try not to go too deep into the weeds here if we can. This is important work. I've got Director Deck. Did I see Director Nicholson put her hand up?
No, but I would like to put my hand up.
Okay,
I can't figure out how to.
Okay, so at this point, I've got Director Deck, Wilson, Martman, and Nicholson. Go ahead, Director Deck.
Thank you for a marvelous report. Really interesting. Just a question on the last page, though. When you say you recommend to develop an amenity policy for each LAP, so that it would be different for every LAP, or would it be uniform? I just don't know if I understood that correctly.
Sure. So each LAP area has kind of their own unique position within the regional hierarchy in terms of amenities. What we meant by that was, a capital planning effort for instance, a new library or a new community center is unique to the LAP. However, it should be done within like an overall umbrella of each amenity. So if there is a community center strategy, obviously you can't have one in each LAP area. So the individual needs must be balanced against the kind of the regional needs as well.
Thank you.
Director Wilson.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. After a 96 or 105 page report, it would be very difficult not to go into the weeds of what's going on here. Thank you for that. Let me start off with a rhetorical question here. Is it only me that sees a certain striking similarity between this presentation and the previous presentation? Because there seems to be an awful lot of overlap between this one and the other one. So, thank you to staff and all the rest of it, and to the people who have done that. There have been all sorts of studies and surveys, which I've referred to before, carried out by various departments and their respective consultants, this one being one of them. And it all seems to be very compartmental, very almost disjointed. So, Has there been any collaboration between your presentations and studies, the previous presentation and studies, or is this all compartmentalized and we're covering a lot of ground with similar things going on all over the place here? I'm not sure what's going on. How many more studies do we need? So has there been any collaboration at all?
Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, hopefully I can answer this question cogently. So this work is informed by the MOCP in particular, and the interim housing needs assessment that was discussed previously. As you know, Renee is on my team. We collaborated quite closely on the work. We have been working on the MOCP in particular for about 4 years now, understanding basically how land use change can occur in the CVRD. So I would say on that point, highly collaborative. We've been working with CVRD quite closely, as well as the other consultants on the projects. We have had opportunity to touch base with CVRD GIS infrastructure as much as we can. There's obviously limits to how much information we can get from those sources, but we've tried our best. I don't know if that answers your question completely, or if you need more detail there.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. And just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. There is in the presentation that I'm looking at on my other screen here, on the very last page, 96 of 96, the final bullet point, which says, much of the evaluation considered in this project could be completed at a regional level, blah, blah, blah. So to this end, we suggest replicating this work for any potential regional growth strategy under consideration by the CVRD. What do you actually mean by replicating this work?
Yep, I can respond to that quite effectively here. So what we've done in this project is we're evaluating complete communities' performance within local area plans to help inform the local area plans as part of the MOCP. Under an RGS, it should one occur. Obviously, there will be a new growth allocation quantum for the region. There will be potentially regional land uses, and there will be potential consideration on regional servicing. As such, this type of analysis would be instrumental in evaluating a potential RGS.
Does that conclude your remarks, Director Wilson? Ms. Garnett, I think you might be able to enlighten us.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Director Wilson's original comment about the number of surveys and the coordination of these projects. So both of the projects that are being presented here at the Special ESC are run out of the Strategic Initiatives Division, so certainly they are integrated. I just also want to speak to the time difference in the surveys mentioned. So Chelsea spoke to slides where we talked about the local area plan workshops and a survey that was a part of that. That took place in the fall of 2023 and was a part of a targeted engagement process with the local area plans. The equity workshop related to the housing needs report that Patrick spoke to, that took place many months later, and again was part of a targeted engagement process. So I just want to make sure that the distinction between those two engagement efforts is clear, and also the coordination through strategic initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Director Martman.
Thank you, Chair. I guess mine is just a little bit in the weeds, but hopefully it's simple. I was noticing that in some of the areas that you include First Nations developments, and I'm just wondering, for the Diamond, there is one next to it called Oyster Bay, which is well along in terms of its development. And just wondering, should that be included? What's the impact of not including it? I'll turn that over.
Aaron.
That's a great question. For this project in particular, we only had direct engagement with the Malahat and Subasset nations. And accordingly, therefore, we only felt comfortable including, and after only with their permission, to include their developments in the work. It would be, per our recommendation, it would be fantastic to engage with the remaining nations in possible future works. And definitely it's super impactful, of course, to incorporate their developments, and likely to the director would have some impact in your local area plan.
Okay, thank you.
I've got Director Nicholson, Abbott, McClinton, and myself. Director Nicholson.
Thank you so much. I thank you, Aaron and Chelsea and Allie. I'm finally seeing this coming together, and I really like this report. And I think you got it pretty much right for the Eagle Heights DE area. And I would concur with Director Martman about the First Nations for that local area. It's really important that Cowichan tribes participate. So I hope that will be able to happen in the future. My one question is about, you recommend business licensing, and I'm wondering what that will do for us.
Okay, well, I'm a data nerd, so this is purely within the context of this project. It's very hard for us to find where many of these amenities are because we don't have business licenses to trace them. So business licenses provide a great data point for us to understand what the current allocation of businesses are. Second, we were unable to do, we wanted to do is, when we thought of this work initially, was to kind of understand kind of what the employment, the allocation of employment was in the local plan areas, and basically more information on the local economy. Because we didn't have that data basis to do an evaluation, it was very challenging. So that's on the project side. More generally, my understanding is how the business licensing regime is quite helpful to basically aid with enforcement of proper business use, and of course it could generate a small amount of revenue for the CPRD.
Any follow-up, Director Nicholson?
No, that's it. People don't like business licenses in our area, though. That's, but I understand the data issue. Thank you.
Director Abbott.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Aaron and Chelsea, for great reports. I am from Area D, and that also represents D&E, but a couple of observations, and it's not perhaps the first time that I've mentioned this, that active transportation, I don't think should be, it's being used with terminology like Cowichan Valley Trail. And I send out a cautionary note that the Cowichan Valley Trail is more like an active recreational route and not always an ideal route for actively transporting oneself from to and from business, to and from school, with the caveat that if you live in areas F or I, yes, that trail would be a wonderful corridor to get you down into the Duncan built-up area. That's one small little observation / quibble. The other would be Area D gets low grades on access to daily needs because we do not have a library. And I think I'm 12 and a half minutes to the library in Duncan, and I'm 12 and a half minutes by car to the library in Mill Bay. I don't think we want to be suggesting that Cowichan Bay, Seaside Village, would be better off with another library. So just observations, and I'm sure there's a macro methodology that you're utilizing. Thank you.
Director McClinton.
I did not put my hand up, nor do I have any questions.
Wow. Thanks for that. That's got me next. So a couple of observations. I had several, but going back to the change in behaviors around the this goes back to the last report in that there's this desire to reallocate future growth into those serviced areas. And I now fully understand the rationale around serviced areas currently and those potential and those that actually have targeted investments and plans on the books to increase services. I'm a little suspicious as to whether or not this goal to swap the 80% of future growth to within the LAP areas is a realistic target, but it's clear that we're targeting for those areas with services, and we'll see if the development community comes along. The one question that I had, or actually there's two I want to bring up. Yes, we have to have our First Nations partners engaged in our projections for the future, but just a couple of examples of where we heard Oyster Bay mentioned, and whether they have standalone services, but what if the services that are being provided by a municipality to a First Nation and not the regional district? Now, I love the idea of perhaps one day we have a regional utilities service where we're even helping out our municipal partners with their utilities. But for instance, in the town of Lake Cowichan, Subasat is having their fire protection, water, sewer. They're more closely linked to the town of Lake Cowichan than intuitively I would think in regards to an electoral area. So that's one observation. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And the other one is, and I know you had to use a data set for this, but my question around, especially the waterfront areas with lakes and waterfront, you go a block from the waterfront and the housing values drop dramatically. And I can just think of my community where you can have a 2,000 square foot home on the waterfront and it's going to be worth 1.6, 1.8 million. You move a block away from the water and you're looking at a $600,000 or $800,000 home. Is that differentiation taken into account in your calculations?
Okay, so I heard two clear questions there. The first was around potentially considering, municipal services and integration of First Nations considerations. The second was around home prices. So on First Nations for Area I in particular, we know that, you're very close to Lake Cowichan for us, the Subasat Nation. When we met with them, however, they expressed interest in being considered as, with their information as part of the local area plan. Geographically close to Lake Cowichan, maybe in spirit closer to the rural local plan area. With regards to your second question on home prices, so we used BC assessment data for this work, which is kind of the assessed value of properties, and we had a large pool to pick from. So while obviously there are high value properties on waterfronts, we're looking at averages across each local plan area. So that information should be not heavily skewed. Of course, if you have like one substantial mansion and then 20 more modest homes, then we might have an issue there. But generally, we think this is defensible.
Thank you for that. And one last question, and it's in regards to the stacking of or the potential growth in areas that either have services or plan for services. Was there any assessment done on those areas, and this could be a two-part, where there's a water service available, but lack of water within that service, so that limiting in regards to the quantity of water available. And secondly, with sewer, there may be a sewer service area or a sewer service, but no sewer units available to accommodate future growth. Were those calculated or considered in the calculations?
That's an awesome question. So basically, we had great information or reasonable information on the boundaries of these systems. We had, for CVRD owned utilities, we had okay information on capacities, and for private systems, we didn't have a lot. We did do some documentary research and attempted some outreach for all utilities. We also looked through minutes and annual reports for numerous privately held waterworks. What we came up with is that we don't have a good sense of the overall capacity for new units in these systems. So we didn't assume that that was a constraining factor. We recognize this is a limitation of our report, and you've rightfully pointed it out, is that we don't know how much growth is occurring in areas that could not feasibly accommodated from their current system capacities. Again, that's one of the reasons why we also recommended the development of a DCC bylaw sometime in the future for the CPRD, is that developing an alternate mechanism to invest in infrastructure in a structured and deliberate manner, may alleviate some of these concerns regardless.
Thank you. Chelsea, you have something to add?
Yeah, thank you. I can build on the First Nations consultation more broadly and as it relates to the LAP. So there is an engagement plan that shows the alignment of engagement from the MOCP process and the LAP process. And one of the key objectives is to consult with First Nations. In that plan, we've identified all of the First Nations who would be of interest in participating for each of the electoral areas. So there's a number of them. And we did communicate and reach out to them and ask for their interest in participating in the process. And the two that responded with interest in participating were the Malahat Nation and Subasset. So we will continue to communicate and leverage opportunities for further consultation and collaboration, but I just wanted to highlight that we did intend to reach out to all.
Thank you for that, Chelsea. And I'll go to Director Wilson, likely to close. Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I noticed there was some subject brought up on home prices, which has been brought forward in the presentation there, and the mortgage amounts that people can afford. I note that you pointed out that there is a cash flow problem with people at the moment, even though they could afford that kind of mortgage to pay for the kind of house prices that we're looking at in the areas. But is a cash flow. This is another variable that's come into all these calculations, the cash flow and the cost of living. So I'm just wondering how something like that, which is so tenuous, could be taken into consideration there. Because it's all very well saying, well, you could afford that according to the calculations, but you can't afford that because you don't have the cash flow. Do you see where I'm coming from here? How do you cope with a variable like that?
As best we can. So when we're doing this type of work, we only have the administrative data available to us to do this analysis. So we can't comment on the individual abilities of certain households to meet their mortgage commitments or their rental commitments. What we do know is incomes, and we know the distribution of incomes, and we do know home prices, and so that's the best we can do. We also know that irrespective of our analysis, homes are still being bought and sold all the time in the CVRD. Which suggests that there is a healthy market for homes. One thing that we will note is that the way home prices are structured right now, the first-time home buyer or a household without access to capital or down payment has basically no chance of affording many homes in the region, and that's kind of irrespective of cash flow considerations.
Good. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you very much.
Looking around the room and online, I don't see any further hands up. I do believe we have a resolution in this report. Ms. Would you read it out for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Your resolution is that it be recommended to the board that the Cowichan, that the Cowichan Valley Regional District Board receive the Complete Communities Grant 1 CVRD Alternate Futures Report.
We have it moved. Is there a seconder? We have a seconder. Any discussion on this resolution? Seeing no hands, call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Chelsea, Aaron, thank you very much for your presentation and your work on this. This is valuable information for us to begin to address some of those issues that we have, and helpful for us to make decisions in planning for future and alleviating our housing crisis. So this is very important work, and I thank you for the work that you've done, and look forward to implementing this within our organization. So thank you very much. With that, I look to Ms. Ferguson. What are we going to do next?
We're on to question period.
Now is our opportunity to turn to the gallery and ask if there's any questions for the chair on today's agenda or other items. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. My name is Susan Kaufman, and I'm from Sutton. I really appreciated the both presentations this morning. The question I have is when it comes to affordable housing, and I believe what I heard was that the attached housing is preferable right now for affordability for many young families. But I also heard with the developers, they want things their way. So we have the provinces setting regulations. We're hearing from the community what they want. We're hearing from the planning experts about how we mesh all of those together. But we have developers that are going by cost because they're driven by their investors. How is the CVRD going to ensure that there is going to be a certain level of attached housing that will make it affordable for more families to own their own home?
Great question. Thank you for that. Can't answer on behalf of the entire regional district. I think that the reports indicated that detached is simply not affordable for most. That attached is a preferred and likely more affordable, attainable type of housing. How do you get the development community and builders to build something that requires virtually the same effort but not as profitable to them as they would like? And that's been a challenge that as long as I've been here, we've been beating the drum for affordable, attainable, below market, subsidized housing. And the development community is more inclined to build a single family detached home because it's the most profitable. So it's a question of, I believe, enthusiastically supporting and approving as often as we can those multiple unit, multi-residential, attached forms of housing, in addition to the secondary dwelling units, those sorts of things. So we don't get a lot of them that come through the door, but it's enthusiastically in supporting those few developers that do choose to bring those to us for adding to the future housing stock.
I'm not sure that I can agree with what you said, but I would ask, when was the last time that the CVRD planning staff approved an attached townhome development?
Well, they don't approve. We do.
Well, you do.
And
put forward and you approve.
I believe there was one in the last year that we didn't approve, and it's very challenging. They're rare. We do not get. I'm thinking more along the lines of multiple units, not a triplex or a fourplex.
I'm speaking to
Yes.
townhomes.
Yes, so I can't recall in my recent memory a townhome development that we have approved. I may still have a little bit of COVID brain fog, but it's been a while.
And that's my point. We're seeing a plethora of apartment buildings, and maybe that's what we have to distinguish when we say attached homes, right? We're seeing lots of rental buildings, lots of the multi-story apartment buildings, but we're not seeing the townhomes.
And it's a challenge because there's a vein of thought that what type of housing do we need? We need all types. There is a certain amount of fluidity if you build multi-unit residential buildings and townhomes and single family, that will all go to alleviating the housing crisis. We haven't done enough of any of those forms, whether it be townhouses, apartments, fourplexes. We haven't done enough, but they haven't been coming in the door either.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else in the gallery, no one online, Ms. Ferguson, what are we going to do next?
We're going to adjourn. So motion to adjourn?
Moved. Seconder. All in favor? We're adjourned. See everybody in 62 minutes.